Hello everyone. This session we will be looking at nucleoids and extrachromosomal DNA in prokaryotes. Now what are the learning outcomes of this session? One, we would be able to understand what do we mean by nucleoids and a little in detail on the prokaryotic DNA per se. We will be able to understand that the prokaryotic DNA that is present in the nucleoids have an organization, the functional aspects of genomic DNA, the extrachromosomal DNA, that is the plasmids that are present in the prokaryotes, and we will also be able to classify or understand that these extrachromosomal DNA can be classified based on their size, their function, etc. Now, let us first look at the nucleoids and let us first understand the structure of the nucleoids. So, very high resolution microscopic studies have shown that the prokaryotic DNA is basically condensed into a small region or it in a region within the bacteria that is called as the nucleoids. Now, this is basically a super resolution imaging of the E. coli. When you look at the composite figure, you will find that you have the nucleoid spread across the bacteria, but it is present in a condensed form. What is also observed from several studies is that the nucleoid itself has an architecture of itself in itself. That means there is a slight curvature in the nucleoid observed. So this dividing cell, as you can see, you will find that you have the DNA present in high density in certain regions and low density in certain regions. But overall, when you look at it, it has a particular architecture. That same architecture you will find in the other cell as well. So it is kind of the fact that there are common things that is present that enables the DNA of the prokaryote to be present in a certain organization, leading to a certain architecture of the nucleoid itself. So when we look at the bacterial genome organization, therefore, what is important is that this nucleoid region is dense. The question that comes up is, why is it dense? Well, the first thing is that there is the DNA already present. But this DNA is also present along with certain proteins. These proteins are enabling the DNA to exist in an organized form. And also what is observed is that the DNA per se itself is actively is actively taking care of gene expression within the bacteria. So you have what is called as transcription and translation happening, and therefore around the DNA you will always find that there is a lot of RNA as well as proteins, and thereby you will find that that entire region looks dense because it is not just DNA, it is DNA plus proteins plus RNA. Interestingly, the group of proteins in the bacteria that is responsible for bringing the genome into a certain organization are called as nucleoid associated proteins. These nucleoid associated proteins can bind to the DNA, and on binding to the DNA, they are able to give a certain architecture or a certain way by which the DNA is going to conform. And so what is observed is that you could have, when the NAP binds, a sharp bending of the DNA, or what you could observe is a wavy pattern of the DNA formed because of the binding of the NAPs, or the DNA may be stiff because of the way the NAPs are associated, or you will find that you have different parts of the same DNA coming together and these NAPs bridge them together. Please do understand that the genomic DNA of the bacteria is always a closed circular DNA. So the nucleoid has a DNA, but this DNA does not have free ends, so it's not linear. It is always a closed circular DNA. Although there are exceptions, there are many bacteria that have been found to have a linear DNA as well. But most bacteria have a closed circular DNA. You will also find this DNA wrapping You'll find that the segments of the DNA bunch together to form a stack. So these architectures, or what we can understand is that the nucleoid region has an architecture, but within the nucleoid region, you have interior designing. And all the sum total of these interior designs lead to the final architecture of the nucleoid. Interestingly, the overall genomic organization for any bacteria is that you have the DNA present in loops. If you can see, you have these loops being formed in the prokaryotic DNA. And these coils are what is called as interwound coils, which is commonly found in most bacteria. You must understand the coiling of the DNA is also termed as supercoiling. So effectively, a closed circular DNA of the prokaryote is always supercoiled. Why is that so? Because, say for example, you have the E. coli that has a genome size of 4.6 million base pairs. So that longer DNA has to fit into the E. coli per se, which is about 1 to 2 micrometers in length. So to fit in a 4.6 million base pair long DNA into a 1 to 2 micrometer size E. coli, the DNA has to be present as a compact form. And it is present as a compact form when it forms such looped structures. So therefore, these looped structures are an organization that is formed. And this loop structure is what is present in the nucleoid region. Interestingly, what is observed is that some of the supercoils are not attached to by the NAPs, while some supercoils are attached to, or the coils are held together by certain NAPs. So you will have different parts of the DNA either attached to NAPs or not attached to NAPs. But this is something that has been observed. Now, interestingly, what is also observed is that most of the supercoils are considered to be negative supercoils. So, the negative supercoils or the supercoiling basically, whether it is positive or whether it is negative, depends on the way, on the direction in which it has coiled. So, if the coiling is towards the right, then it is positive supercoiling. If the coiling is towards the left, then it is what is called as negative supercoiling. So in prokaryotes, most prokaryotes, you will find that the supercoils are existing in the negative plectonemic. Plectonemic stands for this interwound DNA. So most of the DNA is present as negative plectonemic supercoils. Now, just to understand the genome organization a little more, please look at the fact that you can have the DNA coiling even without the NAPs. That is, it is not necessary that a protein has to bind to the DNA to form a supercoil structure. But the DNA has to be a closed circular DNA for it to be supercoiling. Now, because it supercoils, you can see that you have different interwound regions present in this DNA. However, if you go to unwind the DNA in this form where you have no proteins attached, the unwinding can be total. So when we say unwinding can be total, it means that a supercoiled DNA can become completely relaxed into an uncoiled form. So therefore, such bacteria which are not, or such DNA which are not attached to by a protein, or proteins do not demarcate these regions. Therefore, even if you have unwinding beginning here, you will find that the entire DNA can unwind because of the beginning over here, because there's nothing that is going to hold these others from not unwinding, and so you will get this. But at the same time, you may have NAPs binding to strategic positions in the DNA after the DNA coils up to demarcate one region from the other. So you can see that when you have NAPs binding, then this loop or this plectonemic region is demarcated from this plectonemic region, which is demarcated from this and which is demarcated from this. So basically we can see that there are 4 domains present in this coiled structure, and each domain is demarcated from one another because of these. So what is interesting therefore is that you will observe that when you have this domain being relaxed, so you can see that there is unwinding happening over here. So the DNA is opening up, but when the DNA opens up over here, it does not go to the other domains thanks to the NAPs that are demarcating this one domain from the other. So here what you can observe is that because you have these proteins actually demarcating one looped structure from the other, if you want, or if the bacteria has genes that need to be expressed from only this, why should the other domains unwind? Only the domain which has the genes that have to be expressed gets unwound. So basically what we are trying to understand over here is that within the supercoiled DNA, that means within the compact DNA, again there can be several domains. And because there are several domains demarcated from one another, the functionality of this can vary from the functionality of this. That can vary from the functionality of this and this. So that is something that has been observed in the bacterial genome organization. Now, when you also look at the fact that every DNA, every bacterial cell has a closed circular covalent DNA. Most bacterial cells or all bacterial cells have only one copy of the closed circular covalent DNA. So effectively, we can consider that the bacterial cells are haploid. Now, when you have the bacteria going in for division, that is, it has to multiply into two. When it has to go into multiplying into two, the haploid is divided or rather replicated. So you have duplication of the DNA happening to form again two closed circular DNA. And each of these two identical closed circular DNA move to the two opposite poles. A septate is formed, and on formation of the septate, you again have two daughter cells. Now, these two daughter cells have the same number or amount or the size of the genome. And again, you will find that these two daughter cells also are haploids. So effectively, what we are trying to look at is that the nucleoid contains only one copy of the genomic DNA. There are no two copies of the genomic DNA, unlike in, say, a human cell. Human cell has 23 pairs of DNA, which means that every chromosome has a copy. So therefore you have a sum total of 46 and not 23. If there were only 23, then it is haploid. But if it is 23 pairs, then it becomes a diploid. So therefore human cells are diploid, whereas the bacterial cell can be considered to be haploid. Another interesting facet about the function of the bacterial DNA is that the bacterial DNA has all the genes that give rise to functional proteins, and it's the functional proteins that take care of all the activities that the bacteria need to carry out, not just to survive, but also to multiply and grow. So therefore, an observation that is very clear is that because the closed circular DNA is present in the nucleoid region, and the nucleoid is a structure which does not have a nuclear membrane. You see, that is the reason why prokaryotes are termed as prokaryotes. Pro meaning before and karyon meaning without a nucleus. So therefore, all bacteria are prokaryotes. Okay, so they do not have a nuclear membrane around the closed circular DNA or around the genomic DNA, unlike eukaryotic cells. Now, as there is no nuclear membrane, the ribosomes that are present in the cytoplasm of the bacteria get easy access to the RNA. And where does the RNA come from? The RNA comes from the DNA. So see, you can see this thin, fine fiber of DNA, and you can see that from parts of the segments of the DNA, which are genes, those genes are getting transcribed into RNA, but you can see that these RNA are thin fibers that are covered already by ribosomes, which means that ribosomes have already come and attached to the RNA, and once they come and attach to the RNA, they start forming the proteins. which means effectively we are trying to say that even before transcription stops, the translation by the ribosomes to form the proteins has already begun. So, transcription and translation happen hand in hand within bacterial DNA, and therefore, effectively, we can see that the because you have instantly transcription and translation happening at the same time, you can effectively understand therefore that the lifetime or the generation time of the prokaryotes are generally less, because it happens, everything happens very fast and at the same time, almost at the same time. So that's something that is observed in the prokaryotes, thanks to the fact that the nucleoid does not have a nuclear membrane and that the DNA is protected in the nucleoid, but it is not restricting, or the nucleoid is not restricting the ribosomes to come and bind to the RNA. Now we go to another interesting facet of the DNA per se of the bacterial system. So what was observed is that the bacteria, other than their genomic DNA, also seem to have a much smaller but close circular DNA. Now, these close circular DNA, because they are not part of the genomic DNA or the chromosomal DNA, were called as extra chromosomal DNA, but now more so as plasmid DNA. So, they are more commonly called as plasmid DNA. So, I repeat, plasmid DNA that are present in many bacteria are close circular covalent DNA, much smaller than the genomic DNA. So as you can see over here, this is basically the genome. Okay, so you can see that the genomic DNA is all looped, okay, and condensed, okay. And apart from that, you can see this small circular DNA that is present in the cytoplasm. Now you can see that there are many copies maybe of the same plasmid, or there can be more than one type of plasmid DNA present in a single bacteria. Why do you have multiple copies of these plasmids in the bacterial DNA is interesting, because every plasmid DNA is able to replicate on their own, irrespective of whether the genomic DNA is replicating or not. So the copy number of the plasmid DNA can vary from bacteria to bacteria, and that is because, and also from the plasmid to plasmid, because every plasmid has its own origin of replication, which enables it to make multiple copies of itself. So this is something that is very interesting. So it means that all genes present in one plasmid DNA, effectively, if you have more of that plasmid DNA present inside the cell, you have more number of the same genes present within that cell. Therefore, we can therefore say that you can have more than one type of plasmid being present inside a single bacteria. The only contention is that those plasmids that coexist have to be compatible. If they are not compatible, they do not exist within the same cell. And again, what is interesting and important to note is that a bacteria does not need the plasmid DNA for its growth and survival. However, the presence of the plasmid DNA in a bacteria bestows the bacteria with added characteristics, more than what it already has. And that is why in several instances, the presence of this bacterial DNA, the plasmid DNA, gives a competitive edge to that bacteria which has the plasmid DNA over a bacteria that does not have the plasmid DNA. So just going by to the history of the plasmid DNA, in fact, the plasmid DNA were suggested to be present when scientists began to find that certain bacteria become resistant to antibiotics or resistant to certain drugs. So this was typically found, especially when they were observing that viruses that have infected one bacteria, and when these viruses move on to another bacteria, then the other bacteria seem to get certain characteristic of the previous bacteria. So thereby, the conclusions that many of these scientists made were that there was something that is present in these bacteria that could be transferred to the other bacteria. Contention being that the DNA, genomic DNA in the nucleoid is too large to be transferred. So therefore, there has to be something much smaller that can be transferred. And that is when there was a suggestion that possibly there are other small circular DNA also present in the bacteria. So the word plasmid was actually coined by Joshua Lederberg in 1952. And Joshua Lederberg was actually working with viruses again. And in studying these viruses, he was able to basically find that there are certain bacterial DNA which are getting transferred from one bacteria to the other bacteria. So the concept of what is called as um, horizontal gene transfer, that is when you have DNA from one bacteria going to another bacteria, that is called as horizontal gene transfer. And he actually was able to, along with Tatum, show what is called as conjugation. So conjugation is a phenomenon, and this conjugation phenomenon is basically transfer of bacteria from bacterial DNA from one bacteria to the other bacteria thanks to the presence of plasmid DNA. So he coined in one of his publications, he termed those small DNA as the plasmid DNA. He won the Nobel Prize for his work on conjugation with Tatum, and it was basically showing that bacterial genes can be transferred from one to the other bacteria. Of course, by 1960s, several different types of plasmids were discovered, and these plasmids were able to be taken up by the bacteria either from the surrounding environment, or it got the bacteria, or they got the bacteria from other bacteria. Now, let us look at the plasmid DNA classification. There are ways of classifying bacteria, but what we will be focusing more on is classification based on the functions that are attributed to the bacteria due to the plasmid. So we will first look at what is called as F plasmids. F over here stands for fertility. So these fertility plasmids, so as you can see, you have a DNA, you have a bacteria that has the genomic DNA, and it also has the fertility plasmid DNA. Now, what is interesting is that this F plasmid is able to transfer the F plasmid into a bacteria that has no F plasmid. So what the F plasmid does is it is able to form what is called as a bridge or a tube between a bacteria that has the F plasmid and another bacteria that does not have the F plasmid. So this F plasmid makes a copy of itself, and that copy is transferred through the tube into the bacteria that does not have the F plasmid, and then eventually this DNA will circularize to form the closed circular F plasmid. So what happens is that the F plasmid has enabled a bacteria that did not have a F plasmid now to have an F plasmid, simply because it was able to transfer this plasmid, a copy of this plasmid, to the other. So this process is actually what is termed as conjugation. And another important and interesting fact is that what was also observed is that the plasmid DNA can also integrate itself into the genome DNA. Now, when it integrates itself in the genomic DNA, the plasmid is then considered to be an episomal plasmid. So, when the need arises, it can enter the, or it can integrate into the genomic DNA, and when needed, it can also get itself extracted out from the genomic DNA. But it is clear that it is a example of horizontal gene transfer, that is, you have genes being transferred from one cell to another cell, not vertical. That means it is not being passed on to the daughter cell. Of course, it is being passed. That is another thing that is very clear, and it obviously happens. But this is also feasible, and this is what is called as horizontal gene transfer. So it's clear that a bacteria devoid of the characteristics of the plasmid gains the F plasmid and its characteristics. Now, why did we term this as fertility plasmids? Because at that point of time, what was considered is that because this bacteria is a donor and this bacteria is a recipient, so therefore this was considered equivalent to being sexual reproduction, where this is the male and this is the female counterpart. But there is nothing, it is not actually sexual reproduction, it is just transfer of DNA from one to the other. However, the term of fertility remained, okay, because it was basically transfer of the genome of the genes from one bacteria to another, and this they considered as a mode of reproduction. Now, why is the F plasmid able to carry out this entire process? It is because the F plasmid has certain genes that are called as TRA genes, and these TRA genes are able to form first the conjugation tube. It is able to attach to the host. It is able to multiply, transfer the DNA, and make an F minus bacteria into an F plus bacteria. Now, you can never have this conjugation between an F plus bacteria and an F plus bacteria, but you can always have a conjugation between an F plus bacteria and an F minus. So, please understand that now this bacteria, having gained this F plasmid, will be able to transfer this into another bacteria that does not have the F plasmid. So therefore, you will have that if this conjugation process is active, you will have that in a population of bacteria after a certain period, most bacteria in the population can have the F plasmid if the F plasmid is enabling the bacteria to get better survival, to enable better survival. Now we go to the second type of or group of plasmids, that is called as R plasmids. So R over here stands for resistance. Let us consider a bacteria which has a set of plasmids that have genes that render resistance to ampicillin, which means that these plasmids have genes that is able to somehow ensure that the ampicillin does not kill the bacteria. So therefore, what we are trying to say is that this bacteria will not be killed by the antibiotics simply because it has these R plasmids within it. Let's say we have another bacteria which do not have these R plasmids. So when you grow both these bacteria in a nutrient media that contains ampicillin, so this media is fortified with ampicillin. And when you grow both this as well as this bacteria in the same media, what is observed is these bacteria will survive and grow and multiply. But these bacteria will not grow and survive in this media simply because this bacteria does not have the added characteristic of being resistant to ampicillin, and hence ampicillin will kill these bacteria. But ampicillin cannot kill these bacteria because these bacteria have been bestowed by resistance to ampicillin thanks to the genes present in the R plasmid. So that's the reason why it is called as resistance plasmids. Now this was just an example for ampicillin. You can have different R plasmids that render resistance to different antibiotics. Let's go to the next class or next group of plasmid, that is what is called as the Cole plasmids. So again, let's consider a bacteria that has a plasmid DNA which has genes that give rise to cholicinogenic factors, also called as bacteriocins. Effectively, what are bacteriocins? Bacteriocins are toxins. And these toxins can be lethal or can be affecting other closely related bacterial species. That means This bacteria, because it is releasing these bacteriocins can kill the other closely related bacteria. So again, what happens is, because this bacteria has this cold plasmid, it has a higher opportunity or chance to survive than the others. So it has a competitive edge over all the other bacteria that did not have the cold plasmids. So the examples of the bacteria that have these cold plasmids. So for example, you have E. coli. So it is colicin, that is the bacteriocin that is present in E. coli thanks to a cold plasmid. You have Pseudomonas having piosins. These are again bacteriocins. You have Enterobacter cloacae having cloacins. You have Klebsiella having klebicins. You have Lactobacillus having lactococins, and you have Staphylococcus having staphylococins. Interestingly, the name of the species can also be thanks to, the name of the bacteriocin is related to the name of the species per se. So that is how they have been named. But they are all bacteriocins. So piosins can affect the growth of other pseudomonas which do not have the cold plasmid. Cloacins can effectively hinder the growth of Enterobacter that does not have cold plasmid. So effectively, cold plus bacteria can kill cold minus bacteria thanks to the fact that it is able to secrete these toxins. Let us now go to the next class of plasmids. They're called as degradative plasmids. Now, as the word suggests, these plasmids enable the bacteria to degrade certain very specific recalcitrant molecules. Now, when we say recalcitrant molecules, what do we understand? It means that these compounds or molecules are not easily degraded, but because the plasmid DNA has the genes responsible for giving rise to proteins that are able to degrade such substrates, for example, naphthalene, octane, salicylates, hydrocarbons, etc. So, what does the degradative plasmid bestow on the bacteria is that apart from normal carbon sources, these bacteria are also able to survive on difficult or challenging environments. So, where you have such substrates being present, bacteria that have these degradative plasmids will also be able to use those substrates to grow and multiply. So that is again a competitive edge that these bacteria would get. That is, apart from glucose, etc., they can also utilize these carbon sources for their growth and multiplication. Now, degradative plasmids we immediately almost associate with Dr. Anand Mohan Chakrabarty. He's an Indian American, he was an Indian American scientist who worked with Pseudomonas species. And these Pseudomonas species have degradative plasmids. And using the plasmids from various Pseudomonas species, he was able to engineer a new species of Pseudomonas that could degrade oil. So therefore, those Pseudomonas called as superbug were also considered to be oil-eating bacteria, and were uh, prospective bacteria that could be used to take care of oil spills in oceans, in seas, etc. So, in fact, there's a very famous legal suit battle that is connected to Dr. Chakrabarty, Diamond versus Chakrabarty, where as he was trying to patent the Pseudomonas, he had to fight a lawsuit with Diamond. You may go and actually look at the lawsuit to understand what was the battle about, but he was responsible for bringing about the fact that there are degradative plasmids and especially associated with pseudomonas. So, therefore, these degradative plasmids can be used for bioremediation. Now, what is bioremediation? It is a phenomenon by which using biological systems or biological tools, one can remove or one can improve the condition of, say, water or soil or air by getting rid of recalcitrant compounds. Like those such recalcitrant compounds are called as xenobiotics. So, because if you cannot degrade the xenobiotics, they continue to accumulate in the natural resources, and when they continue to accumulate in natural resources, they cause pollution. So, since you have these bacteria that can degrade such xenobiotics, it can help in manage environmental pollution. Therefore, it has a big role in bioremediation. Certain examples of such degradative plasmids are toll plasmids, which are able to degrade toluene, etc., octoplasmids that can degrade octane, cam plasmids that can degrade camphor, sal plasmids that can degrade salicylates, NaH plasmids that can degrade naphthalene, and so on. So there are many such degradative plasmids present. Now we move on to another group of plasmids, which is called as the virulence plasmids. As the word suggests, these plasmids give the bacteria characteristics of pathogenesis. That means that the bacteria can become pathogenic and it can infect other cells, may it be animal cells or plant cells, effectively. So some virulent factors that are produced because of the virulence plasmids are toxic. And since they are toxic, they kill the host cells or the infected cells. That means the cells in which they infect. Or even if they don't infect, just because they are able to produce the toxin, they are considered to be virulent. Or these virulent factors help the bacteria to attach to the host cells and then invade it. That is another thing that is possible. And many a times these virulence factors enable the bacteria to become parasitic. So as you can see in this figure, the bacteria that have the virulence plasmids are able to produce these proteins, which are called as adhesin proteins, that can be attached to the membrane or the wall, cell wall of the bacteria, or they can be attached to the ends. Can you see that? Ends of the specialized structures called fimbriae on the bacteria. And through these adhesins, the bacteria is able to attach to surface molecules that are present on the host cell. So this could be either an animal cell or it could be a plant cell. But what is important is that the attachment of the bacteria to the host cell is thanks to these adhesins. From where do these adhesins come? They come from genes present in the virulence plasmids. And having attached, these can either release the toxin into the plant or the animal cell, or what can also happen is that the plasmid itself can be transferred into the host cell, and now the plasmid inside the host cell can be transcribed and translated to give rise to whatever is the virulence factor. So this is a schematic observation of what we are trying to say over here. Examples of bacteria with virulence plasmids: you have pathogenic E. coli that can have virulence plasmids. There is Shigella, Salmonella typhi that causes typhoid. So they also have virulence plasmid that enables causing typhoid. Yersinia, which is able to cause bubonic plague because of the presence of virulence plasmids again. Bacillus anthracis that causes anthrax, again thanks to virulence plasmid. Clostridium botulinum, which causes food poisoning, again because of virulence plasmids. Clostridium tetani, which is responsible for tetanus, again because of virulence plasmid. Vibrio cholerae, that can cause cholera, again because of the presence of virulence plasmids. Agrobacterium tumefaciens, this has a plasmid that is called as tumor-inducing plasmid, and when this plasmid enters a plant cell, then it can cause crown gall, a tumor-like structure in the plants per se. And likewise, there are many more other examples. So let us conclude with respect to nucleoids and extrachromosomal DNA. That nucleoids are a dense region in the prokaryotes, and that houses the genomic RNA, as genomic DNA, RNA, and proteins. These proteins are either actively being synthesized by the from the genomic DNA, or these are proteins that enable the organization and functioning of the DNA. That DNA is a closed circular DNA organized into loops as it has to fit into the small sized bacteria, and which in turn are set into multiple domains with plausible division of functions. Apart from the genomic DNA can be present extrachromosomal DNA, more commonly called as plasmid DNA, and these plasmid DNA in turn can be grouped into different groups based on or depending on their function. The bacterial cells can accommodate several copies of the same plasmid or even more than one type of plasmid DNA within them. Thus, genomic DNA enables the bacteria to carry out all functions necessary for its growth and survival, while the genes present in the plasmid DNA bestow the bacteria with added characteristics, which gives the bacteria a competitive edge. Thank you.